Hi everybody, welcome back. This is part 26 of our Trumpeter 1/200 scale HMS Hood build. In this video I'm just going to finish off the secondary armament for the model, which includes the Quad Vickers mountings and the UP rocket launcher mounts. I'll be building the UP launchers from the Pontos parts, which are added to a few bits of Trumpeter plastic, the actual barrels. I'll be using the MicroMaster quad mountings that I reviewed earlier on in the week, but I'll be modifying those as well with the Pontos etched brass sights, which will improve the sights on the 3D printed parts, and also I'll probably replace the barrels. I've just taken some close-up photographs of the 3D printed parts, and the barrels really aren't as good as the turned brass ones in the Pontos set, so I'm probably going to replace them. I'll also go through the build of one of the quad mountings directly from the Pontos set, from the resin and etch brass and turned brass as well. And that's just in the spirit of showing you the whole build of the Pontos set. I know that some of you have got the Pontos set and will be wanting to follow how that part of the build comes together. So even though I'm going to use the MicroMaster parts, the 3D printed parts, I'll do a build of what's provided in the Pontos set as well. So with that, as usual, we'll get over to the bench and get those parts together. So I'm going to make a start with the quad mountings. I'm going to just build one from the Pontos set just to show you how that goes together. I've already done one here, which I built as a comparison for the MicroMaster parts, which are these 3D printed quads, which are obviously already put together, so they need very little work. We'll come on to that a bit later on, but I did want to show you how the Pontos parts went together for those of you that don't want to invest in the extra 3D printed parts. The first thing that I want to do is clean up this resin, which is the main body of the quad, and it contains the ammunition drums here. It has some little spigots on it which we need to keep. Don't think that that's a moulding flaw, because that's what mounts the training wheels later on, the etch brass wheels. The other thing that we need to do with this resin part is to drill some holes in the front to receive the turned brass barrels. So you can see here that I've already fitted them to this particular example. The problem with this white resin is that it's very difficult to see the detail on it and to find where you need to drill these holes. So the first thing I'm going to do is just give them a quick dusting of primer, and it'll just reveal a little bit better the detail on it and where we've got to attach the parts, and particularly where we've got to drill. So I'll just do that now and come back. So that quick squirt of primer's just revealed the detail a lot better, and it's just easier to see where we need to drill the holes for the barrels. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. So while I'm waiting for that primer to dry, I'll just have a look, just take you to the photo etch sheet that we're going to be using. This is Pontos sheet 13, and it contains most of the armament. These are all the spaces where I built the 4-inch mountings last week. We have the 3 pom-pom mountings here, which I'll be doing probably next week in part 27, and these few pieces here on the edge of the fret are the parts for the Quad Vickers mountings. You can see that I've already used some for the first gun that I built. We will be using these shield parts here, or 2 of the shield parts, to modify the 3D printed parts. And I'll also be taking the sights from these again to replace the slightly poorly produced one on the 3D print. So I'm just going to get the parts that we need off the fret and lay them out. Right, so these are the parts that we need. And just to give you an idea of the scale of these, this is a beer bottle top. Unfortunately the beer's gone, but there's some more in the fridge for when I've finished. And you'll notice that these are the turned brass barrels, and as is often the case with Pontos parts, they're sometimes turned together with another part, and in this case the quad barrels, the Vickers barrels, are turned together with one of the small hose reels here, so we have to separate them from each other, and obviously save the hose reels, we need all of those. So these are the 4 barrels that we're going to be using on this particular part of the build. We also have 3 parts for the mounting plate here. We have a couple of parts for the trunnion sides, which go along the side of the mounting here. This is one example of one of the sights. Trumpeter provide alternatives, and I'm not quite sure why they do that. The sights that I've seen on the quads are this type, which is a circular one and an oval shape here on the left hand side. So those are the ones that I'm going to be using. I'll save these alternatives just in case it comes to light that they were actually fitted on one or more of the mountings. We have this part here which needs to be folded in half. It's the operator's cradle, so basically the sling that the gunner used to hang on to the weapon, and hang on was probably the operative phrase. This is a part that needs to be folded up, which is the base of one of the training wheels, and this is just one of the extension arms which I assume helped with the elevation of the weapon, and that goes on the top. There's also a couple of wheels which I haven't cut out yet. I'll do those a bit nearer the time so they don't get lost. So now that we've got the resin painted with a bit of primer, it's much easier to see the locations for where the barrels need to be drilled out. So I can go ahead and do that, and I'm using this is a 0.5mm bit, and I'm using it in the power drill just because I find it easier to use very fine bits in an electric drill like this. I'm just going to move these parts to this side. They're very easy to just scoop up and lose, so we'll just push them off camera for the moment. So I'll attach the 4 barrels now. You can see that on the completed part they're virtually flat, they're virtually level to the angle of the gun, so there's no elevation on them really. So they're at rest, and I'm just using some medium super glue. So I'll get the first one in. I worked from top to bottom when I was fitting these. So I've got some medium super glue laid out. Find it easier to actually hold them with my fingers, you get a better grip. When we're gluing these barrels, the important thing is to get them all perfectly aligned when looking from above. And also at the same angle. The guns all elevated at the same angle, they were fixed together. So you want them all to be at the same angle. So just looking from above, just check that they're all pointing in the same direction. And when viewed from the side, they're all at the same elevation. This is the right hand side. These are slightly awkward to get positioned. They'll only go in one way, and they're very precise to the resin. The thing that I look for is there's a little cutout at the bottom here, and that fits over this little stub at the bottom back end of the mounting. So that's in the correct location. This little arm at the front just tucks in above the barrel here, and I want to attach that just with some extra thin super glue. Just drop the extra thin in where you can, and it'll just wick up behind the part and fix it in place, hopefully. So that's one of the sides in place. Just flip it over now and position the left hand one. And with this one, the cutout that you can see here at the back just needs to slot over this little moulding in the resin. So that's the correct position for the part. And again, I'll just load some extra thin into there. You can see the glue, well, I can, I don't think you'll be able to see, but I can see the glue wicking up behind the part, so you know that you've got a good fixing when it does that. So those are the two trunnion sides. Okay, so we'll do this part next, and this is the mechanism here on the side. And that mounted the wheel which rotated the mounting from side to side. The wheel on this side was the elevation wheel, so that elevated the barrels up. Because these were an anti-aircraft weapon, so you did need to have that elevation on these. Put this, I'm going to make the folds on this part now, and the first one is to fold it in half, really. more or less along that line there. Then the other arm bends over on itself as well. Try and hold on to it. So after those two folds we end up with a part that looks something like that. To be honest, I don't think there was any need for Pontos to overcomplicate that like they did. That would have been perfectly okay just as a single etch part without the need to fold it up like that. The folding doesn't really add any sort of dimension to the part at all. So that could have just been flat etched, I think. So this part locates on the side and it needs to go onto the little resin stub that's sticking out there. And that just moves it away from the trunnion side enough to mount the wheel on top of the column there. So we'll just glue that into place first. I'll just put a spot of medium on that stub. Just need to reinforce that. It's a very small contact point. I'll just give that a squirt of accelerator just to harden it. So this bracket here has this tiny pin on top which holds the training wheel. So while we're in the vicinity, I'll put that wheel on now. So again, I'm looking for the little pin that we attach the wheel to. I might need a magnifier for this. It's getting to the limit of what I can see. No, managed it. So that's in place. When it's when the glue's set up, I'll just fold up the little handle on the side there. But we don't need to do that yet. I'll put the other training wheel, which goes on this moulding here at the side. So just a tiny dab of glue on the end of the resin there. I'm going to have to add just a little bit more to that. I don't think I've got enough glue on there. Again, just a squirt of accelerator. And now that they're set up, you can just bend up the little handle very, very gently. You don't want to dislodge the wheel. Okay, that's that. The next thing I want to do is to fit the gunner's cradle. This is in two halves, just needs to be folded on itself. And I guess you can try and glue this together, but I don't think it needs it. And this locates at the back, and it is offset a little bit to one side. So it just goes on the back of the resin there. Okay, that'll do. I'll actually use the same sight as we have on the 3D printed part. So this is the equivalent etch brass one. So the actual sights bend up like so, and we just have a couple of tabs which just help to locate it on the mounting itself. We need to get a firm grip of these, because if you don't, the edge will just bend where it really wants to and not where it needs to. That's what we need. The two sights at the back need to fold up as well, and I can adjust these once it's fitted. So these mount right on top of the gun here. So I'm just trying to tack it in place at the minute. We can add some more glue and reinforce it once it's in position, but the tricky thing is getting it into the right place. Okay, so that's got it in place now. Just some last adjustments to the sights themselves, just make sure they're in a straight line. Okay, there we are. Those sights are really nice, I like those. They're much better than the Trumpeter ones, and they're actually quite a bit better than the 3D printed ones as well. So I'll take those off later on and fit them to the 3D mountings. These three parts here just stack together to form this base here, and we would normally cut this resin off using the block at the bottom, which fits onto the little square bit there. The last thing to do, now that the sights are in place, is to just fit this bracket, and again that's has to be folded in half, and this attaches just to the top of the sight here and down onto the mounting. So it's some sort of mechanism, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but some mechanism to presumably lift the guns up. So that's a completed Pontos Quad Vickers, and they're quite nice. The only thing that's missing from this is the set of shields, which are these parts here, and as you can see, Pontos provide 4 pairs of shields. We don't need all 4, only the 2 afterguns had shields, the ones next to the rear defence position. The 2 forward guns that were on the forward side of the bridge next to the conning tower, they didn't have shields on and would look just like that. Incidentally, the guns had nicknames. The 2 forward guns were known as Pip and Squeak on the port and starboard side, and the 2 after guns next to the after control position were known as Simon and Peter, port and starboard. So those, if made up, all 4 of them, would look perfectly good. They're very nice and much better than the Trumpeter parts, which I have one somewhere. So they look far and away better than the Trumpeter part, which is this one here. The other problem with the Trumpeter gun is that the sights are etched into the shield parts. You can see this is a shielded gun, and Trumpeter would have you fit shields to all four of these guns. So the two that you mustn't fit shields to, I don't know quite how you would do the sights on them, because they're there at the top. But anyway, we're not using those. You can see that there's a big difference in the size of them. So there, you'd have to be happy with those. I'm just going to come on now to the 3D printed gun, which is the one that we're going to use. And I just want to check the part to make sure that it's clear of all the supports. 3D printed parts, as I explained in the review, have to have these supports in order to print correctly. So I just need to make sure that they're cleaned up properly. You just have to work out which are supports and which are actually parts of the gun, because there's some very fine details. So you can see that the traversing wheel here has a very fine stem or axle underneath it, so we don't want to remove that, but right next to it there's a support, so we just need to break those away like so. So the only modifications I'm going to make to these is to try and fit the Pontos shield to them, or to two of them, and I'm not sure at the moment whether or not to replace the barrels. I'm possibly thinking not, but I'll certainly replace this sight here, which is filled in. It's not really moulded properly or cast properly, but we are going to have to work out a way of fitting the shields to two of these. I want to fit the Pontos etched shields to this mounting. They just need bending. There's a turnover at the top and something like a 40-degree bend at the top of the shield, like that. So obviously do that on both sides and get it to match up. I'm not using the Pontos supplied brackets for these shields. I don't really think they add much, and they're obviously not designed for these 3D printed parts, so it's not likely that they'll fit. So you can see here we've got to clear away these little supports, and that's because the shield fits just behind the magazines here, and anything in its way will stop it from locating properly. I've already done one of these with the shields and it was fairly tricky, and what I ended up doing was just sewing a very slight groove into the trunnion just behind the magazines, and that just gives something for the etch brass shield to mount into. You don't want to go far, it's just a case of putting that slight groove in. I don't think it's strictly accurate. The shield would have stood away from the trunnion a little bit, but for the size I don't think anybody's going to notice that. So just clearing that space should give us a nice smooth contact point when we come to fit the shield. I think that's going to work. So I'll do the same for the other side. So I'll go ahead and glue these on, and I'm just putting a very fine bead of medium super glue along the inside edge of this shield, and hopefully that'll just locate in the groove that we've created in there, and it's just provided enough support just to locate that shield. So we've got the sighting port between the two magazines here on this side, and having done that, we can then put the other side shield on at the same height so that it matches. It'd be much easier, of course, to just get the 3D printed quads with shields, but I'll just avoid the expense of that with this. Okay, so I think we've got that. So I managed to replace the broken sight. The shields are in, so together with this one here, which I've already primed, we have the two after quad mountings. So a bit of a hybrid really between the Model Master 3D parts and some etched brass detail from Pontos on the shields. Fortunately, I don't have to do anything with these two, so I'll just clean those up, get them painted, and we can fit them. So these will be the two forward mountings. Okay, we'll just move on to the UP launchers now. I've made one up. This is from Trumpeter plastic and the Pontos etched brass, but the actual frame's quite nice. I think the Trumpeter has etched brass frames as well, so you should be able to make a decent representation with the Trumpeter kit, but obviously I've got the Pontos set, so that's what I've used here. So I'm going to get the parts out and make the second launcher up. There are 5 to do altogether. I'll probably just do 4 to start with for the shelter deck. The 5th one sits on top of B turret, so that's quite a way in the future now, so I'll probably just get on with the 4 for the shelter deck, but we'll build the second one on camera now. So I want to start with the Trumpeter parts. So we just have the main body and the side with the door on that we're going to replace. And there are 5 rows of tubes, which we also need from Trumpeter. There are 3 different types of part, so we just need to be careful to get the right ones. So that's the Trumpeter plastic that we need, and the etched brass from Pontos is here. These are the UP launchers, so we get 5 sets. We'll cut those out in a little while. The hardest thing to do is the actual frame here, which has several bends in it. The actual cage isn't square or oblong, it's got little angles on the side, so it's actually octagonal, which is quite a challenge to fold up. The fold lines are marked in, and the ones on the corners are probably a millimetre apart, so that's quite a test to get them folded. So I'm going to start off by cleaning up these Trumpeter parts, and then we'll start cutting out some of the brass. We have to sand some detail off this, so there's a vision port up here that we need to sand off. It should just make sure all the sprue gates are clean as well. And this little box at the side here, we need to remove the hinges from that because there's an etched brass piece that overlays that. The side panel with the door just glues on, and I'm going to glue it before I remove the door. It's just easier to get a good grip of it. This is Tamiya's fairly new, I think, or at least new to the UK. Extra thin quick setting solution, which is good. I'm not sure that it's that much faster than the standard really. So I'm just going to leave that to set up and get on with putting the tubes together. We have to assemble these as a group, so just clean the ends off. I suppose you could drill the ends of these out whilst they're in this state, but gosh, that would be tedious. 20 tubes on each launcher and 5 launchers, so you do the maths. That's a lot of holes to drill. This one here with the spigots on the sides, that's the central one. And the next ones to go in are the ones with the holes straight through the middle. Just be careful when you're doing this, if you're building the model, just to get them the right way around. There is a front and back to them, so you can see that there are 2 bands at the back as opposed to the single one at the front. So we get them all in the same orientation. I just want just assemble them, and then just a touch of the glue. Then the upper tube, or the upper rack of tubes, goes on as well. So just make sure that they're square before the glue goes off. As I understand it, these UP launchers, which were basically rocket launchers, weren't that successful, but Hood had 5 of them. See how they want to wander into away from square, so just be aware of that and let the glue set up. I actually prefer these sanders. They're still from Ultimate Modelling Products, but they're stiffer than these thinny sticks. And the reason I prefer them for use like this is that the thinny sticks can curve because they're a bit softer, and you can end up actually curving the sides down, whereas these are flat, so you've more chance of getting a nice flat surface. And I'm just going to go around the edge where the piece was glued onto the side, just to get rid of very slight join mark there between the 2 parts. Just go back to these tubes now, and I just want to flatten the ends just so that they're all protruding the same amount. I don't want one of them to prevent the brass parts from sitting properly. These little pins on the side are to mount into the sides of the housing here. And I actually found that they were a little bit tight, especially when we've got the etched brass on. This isn't that flexible, so it was pretty hard to get that in, and pushing it around can disturb the delicate brass. That's what I found on the first one that I built. So I'll probably just sand that off a little bit and get it a bit flatter, so that we don't have to spread the mounting as much. So this is the part for the side with the separate door on, so that's the next thing we'll do. This is thick super glue that I'm using for these parts. And I use thick because it just gives a little bit more time to position the pieces. We have a hinge here just to match up. The next part is the vision port, which goes at the top here. If we're sanding something like this, I always sand towards the part that the brass is glued to, like that. If you go in the other direction, it tends to pull it off. So just file it in one direction. So these are some of the detail parts that we need to be fitting to the mounting here. So we have the vision port. There's a panel that goes just below it here. There's a tiny fitting that fits down at the bottom here on the front of the mounting, and this pair of doors here are for the locker on the side, so I can put all those on as well. The next one, a panel fitting to the front here. The vision port's open, so I don't actually want to apply glue to the part, otherwise it will flood it. So I'll just put a spot of glue on the part itself and just drop it into place. I'm not going to fit this bracket yet because it has these protrusions on it which stick out at the front, and I'll damage that trying to get the actual tube launcher in. So this is the most difficult part of the UP launcher, which is folding this frame up here and getting the front of the frame fitted as well. We have to make sure that this is clean of any fret attachments, because if we don't do that, it won't fold up properly. And with the folds, it just helps a little bit if we do the folds in the correct order. The hardest one to do is the one here on the edge. So there's about a millimetre fold there, right on the edge. If we leave that until the end, when the thing's all wrapped up, it's hard to get to that. So we'll do that one first and then work along the launcher. These are 45-degree bends. So we just need to get them approximate at the moment. The actual final shape is determined by this end panel. So you can see the octagonal shape of it. So the parts will fold up to that rough shape. And eventually it should come round and more or less meet itself. Now I didn't glue that at this stage. There's hardly any surface to glue in any case, but I found that at this stage putting the plastic rocket tubes in helped to locate the brass correctly. So you can see the sides here have got the holes in for those pins to slot through, but they're both okay. I don't know whether you can hear the commotion outside, but it's lambing season. We live out in the countryside and there's lots of lambs coming into the fields opposite the house, and when they're newborn they get to know each other by talking to each other. So that's what all the noise is about, and it's probably feeding time as well. The farmer will be around to give them some tea. So with the outside cage wrapped around and on the pins, I'll just put a tiny bit of extra thin in there just to locate the cage in the right place. So that gives us the correct location now for the cage, and that's fairly firm. I'm not going to glue the bottom, partly because there's hardly anything to glue to, and if we folded it properly it should go more or less in the right position. We can just check now by folding the back up. So with that folded up and the back of the launcher glued down, I want to put that into the cradle, and as I said before, the pins on this are a bit too big and it takes quite a bit of force to get them into the mounting, so I'm just going to take a little bit off them. There is a top and bottom to it, so the top is the part with the hole in. That's gone in much easier than the first one that I did. So with the tubes installed, I can put the front of the launcher on now. There's very little contact point for you to work with on this, but I'm happy with that. That's okay. This bracket here has a couple of little projections that need to be folded. We have these two little brackets here which fit on the back, and this mechanism here is the elevation jack that pushes the cage up. When I'm bending anything this small, you've got to really have a firm grip on them, and these Tamiya photo etch pliers are just the job for that. Got a really precise tip on them. And then finally we're just going to fold the jack up. So it's just a little box, and I found the easiest way to fit this is to apply some glue to the end of the jack and fit it into the underside of the launcher. There is a hole on the bottom of the launcher which you can just get the top into, and at this stage I'm not bothered about the bottom end. I just want the top to set up, the top of the jack. With the top of the jack glued onto the underside of the launcher, I can just adjust the bottom for it to fit just above the bar that we've just put in here. So that's it, one of the UPs. There we are, that's another one done, and that's ready to go on the ship when it's painted. Okay, so that's some of the UP launchers built, and the 4 Quad Vickers guns are all ready to paint and put on the ship. I haven't got time in this episode to actually fit them to the model. The Quad Vickers, I have to build a couple of platforms for the after positions, and I want to repaint the platforms at the side of the bridge as well. I painted them, the platforms, in dark grey originally, and I want to change that to Cortesine red, so I'll do that before I fit the guns. I will be able to catch up a little bit next week on the secondary armament and get them all fitted. I have received the Micromaster 3D 4-inch guns, which are here. I'll take a close look at those in a separate video early on next week and do a comparison of them with the Pontos parts that I built in the last episode. I've also got a full complement of the 4-inch ready-use lockers, so I'll be able to fit all 35 of those to the shelter deck as well. I have run out of time this week to build the platforms for the aft quads, which is quite a complicated structure with some complicated railing work around the top of them and some ammunition boxes to build for them as well. So I'll do that at the beginning of part 27 and go on to fit all the rest of the secondary armament, including the new 4-inch guns as well. So that'll be coming up in part 27 next Friday night, usual time about 8 o'clock. And in the meantime, have a great week everybody, stay safe, look after yourselves, and I'll see you in another 7 days. Bye for now.